Jen. I finally have a updated version of my Pincushion tutorial for you guys. So it's gonna follow, I have pictures with a voiceover, and it's hopefully a little bit more condensed and has a few tips and tricks in it. So it's updated from the one I did, oh, it must have been a year or two ago. And I'm gonna put the old one below. The old one is longer, and but it does have some actual video footage of me making the pincushion, which is might be helpful. But I'm hoping that the following pictures along with the voiceover that you guys will get the gist of how to make these. So this is the one that I made in the video. This starts off with a 5.5 inch circle, and it ends up being just under, or just about 4 inches across. This one here is teeny tiny. This one is 3 inches across, and I started with a 4.5 inch circle. And I am actually contemplating selling these two as a set. I was going to sell them individually, but they coordinate. I'd really like to see them go to a home together. I just have to figure out exactly how I'm going to do that. So, but in any case, I hope you guys like the following tutorial. Let me know if it's helpful for you guys, and have a super great day. Bye-bye. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is cut two 5.5 inch circles, and we're going to take those and place them with right sides together and stitch a 1/2 inch from the outside border all the way around, leaving a little opening. And you can do this, you can absolutely do this with hand stitching. I've done it that way. Just make sure you use small stitches, or you can use a sewing machine, but in either case you want to make sure you back stitch by the little hole so that when you stuff it, you don't have any problems with your stitching coming apart. And once you get it all stitched, it's kind of difficult to see in this picture, but you want to take a very sharp pair of scissors and make little snips about 1 inch apart all the way around, so that when we turn it inside out, that we have a nice, that helps the circle lay nice and smooth. And to turn it around, I actually had a very small opening on this one, but you just want to put your finger in the little hole and go all the way down to the bottom and grab a little piece of the fabric and pull it through, and then you just start wiggling it through, and it will turn itself around. Once you do that, you want to take some type of long instrument, a paintbrush or a pen, and really put it inside the pincushion and really smooth out that seam. And then the next thing you want to do, and I always forget to do this, and it's really a pain if you forget to do this later, mark off right now where the exact center of both sides are, so that when we start stitching our quadrants later, that we know where the center of the cushion is. So just mark that off. You're going to cover it up, so it doesn't matter. You can do it with a permanent marker. So here is my hole, and I'm going to start stuffing again. This is a tiny bit smaller than I would normally make, but it will work out just fine. This is the stuffing I use. It is 100% polyester fiberfill. It works really well in that you can compact it really tight inside of the pincushion. And what I've found is one of my tips, because I do have arthritis, and this was one of my problems with making these initially, is that I use a paintbrush that is old and has some really stiff bristles. And what that will do is it'll grab the polyfill and really help you stuff it into the pincushion. So this part, it takes a little bit of time. You want to get as much of the fiberfill in the cushion as you can. So once you think it's full, you want to take your finger or the paintbrush and really compact the fiberfill and then add some more. And you want to do that 4 or 5 times until you can really get no more fiberfill inside the pincushion. And that'll just help it look really nice and full and hold up well in the end. And then we are going to, when you get it really full, you just kind of compact it one more time, grab with your fingers, pinch the hole closed, and you want to sew it shut. And it really doesn't have to look pretty. We're going to cover this up with some trim. So you can use a whip stitch. You just want to kind of keep your stitches close together so that you don't have any fiberfill coming out. And I go down the opening and then I come back. So that is stitched twice and it should stay closed now nicely. So here is our pincushion and we have our center marked, but before we start sewing our quadrants, we want to tack on some trim. And I do this with a hot glue gun. You want to use just a tiny little bit of hot glue. When we do our stitching of our quadrants, that's what's really going to hold our trim down. We don't really have to worry about it coming off. So right now we just want to get our trim adhered on there so we don't have to worry about it as we're doing the quadrants. You want to make sure that your trim is pretty taut, nice and tight. There aren't any gaps, because once you pull your quadrants with your thread, if you have gaps in your trim, it's really going to show. So that's really the only thing here. That part's pretty easy. Just get it tacked on there. And the next thing we're going to do is use a couple of buttons to help us sew our quadrants. And this will using these buttons will help keep your fabric from tearing as you're pulling the quadrants, as you're pulling the thread over the quadrants, because you have to pull it really tight. So we're going to cover up these buttons later with some decorative buttons or whatever you would like to cover them with. So it doesn't really matter. They don't have to match perfectly. But you want to take 4 yards of button thread or heavy duty thread that you can really pull on and is not going to break. I find that the button craft thread works the best. I've never broken it. Even some of the heavy duty threads, I've broken it pulling the quadrants closed. So I do recommend the craft and button thread. You want to start with 4 yards so that you have enough to do all 8 quadrants at once. And you're going to tie a knot, leaving several inches at the end, because you're going to be using that tail to tie off several sections. But you're going to run your needle up and down one side of the button and then through right prior to your knot. You're going to run it through so that you've secured your thread to your button. I hope that makes sense. And then we're going to start sewing our quadrants. So you're going to go down through the button all the way through your cushion and come out the center on the other side. This can be tricky right here because your cushion is so thick at this point. So if you have somebody around to help you squeeze the cushion as you're doing this part, that would be helpful. But the goal here is to get a button on both sides and pull it back through and tie it off and have it be, I guess, as squished as possible in the center, because that's going to help you make your quadrants. It's going to make it easier to make the quadrants. So you want to pull it through and just tie it off really, really nice and tight, and you're going to tie a knot. And then you're going to start going around and making your quadrants. And the very first one, I like to pull the thread around where my trim is overlapping, or where my 2 pieces of trim come together. I do overlap the trims, and then I hope you can see here I'm pulling the thread very close to the end of that, and that's going to really help secure that tightly so that it doesn't come undone. So I pull around one side, and then I'm going to pull around 180 degrees from that, and then I'm going to tie that off with a knot, and you have to pull really tight. Again, if you have a second pair of hands around if somebody can help you. That makes this a lot easier. It's a little tricky to do by yourself, but it can be done. I did this one by myself. So you want to pull that really tight and get a knot tied there with the tail of the end of your thread, so that you can go on to your next quadrant. And at this point you have a lot of thread because you started with 4 yards doubled, so you're pulling 2 yards through there. Just take your time because your thread can get, you know, knotted up. So just take your time as you're doing this part. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go the other halfway around, and you're going to do 2 more around one way and around the other way, and then we're going to tie that off again. So right now we have 4 quadrants, and then we're going to split each of those 4 quadrants, going around and around again, each side, tying it off in a knot, and then you're going to do your final round, and now you have 8 quadrants. I hope that makes sense. And like I said, I have a video, my old video below, which is more detailed and actually has some video of me doing parts of this. But I think you guys probably are getting what I mean. Now at this point, you do not want to cut those threads. You don't want to cut those threads until we have all of our embellishments on at the very, very end, because you want to sew your embellishments on whenever possible. So this is what it looks like on the opposite side. And so I've picked out a couple buttons here. This one, I actually went up and down underneath my quadrants where I have the thread, and I adhered this button with the seam binding. But before I actually took it off here because I'm like, oh, I want to sew my button on the other side. So I went back through my pincushion with the needle through the buttons, and make sure you use all of the different 4 holes in the button. If you go through one hole, you know, too many times, the thread will start getting caught. But I sewed the button on the bottom and then came back through to the top. And again, I adhered this button on the top because when I adhered it with the thread, it just wasn't tight enough, and I could have glued it, but I decided to actually adhere it with the seam binding. So I ran my seam binding up and down through my threads there, actually tied a knot underneath the button, and then I started weaving the tails of the seam binding up and down every other one, using this little paint palette, little paint knife, to slide the seam binding underneath those threads. So I went round and round, and I did use a little hot glue to secure my ends. I just tucked them underneath. I made a like triple bow with some lace and some seam binding. And you can see I still have my thread sticking out here with the needle, so I'm going to sew that right to my pincushion. I'm also going to use a little bit of hot glue to just get it to adhere to the pincushion where I want it. But I just feel it's really important to sew your embellishments on so that they last a long time. And here's the final product. I also sewed this, I made a little charm with some beads and a little bird, and the top chain I also sewed underneath there where my thread was coming out, which was right where my bow was. And yeah, so it's all done. It does take a bit of time to make these. They do take a little bit of practice. I think they're well worth it in the end. They make absolutely beautiful gifts, and they last for a really long time. So I just think they're really nice keepsakes to give away. So if anyone has any questions, please let me know. Again, the other videos below, which might help you, but this one I wanted to do a little bit more condensed version, as well as have some of these. This one has a few tips in there that makes it easier for you. So I'll be talking to you soon. Have a great day. Bye-bye.